Hello, my name is Tara Jacobs, and I am a member of the Massachusetts Governor's Council. I hope after watching the first panel, you will also watch the second panel discussion, which centers around the experience of applying for a pardon and is made up of an expert panel of members of the legal community, the Advisory Board of Pardons, victim services, and reentry services managers who can speak to what it's like to apply for a pardon, the emotional support that is probably a good idea when applying for a pardon, and just really shares what considerations are important when you're filling out your pardon application. To that point, there will be a QR code that comes up on the screen. I encourage you to scan the QR code. It takes you to a web page with many resources and links and useful information about the pardon process in Massachusetts. The first link is the PDF for the application for a pardon. Download that, print it out, fill it out, and send it in to Governor's Council as the first step in applying for a pardon in Massachusetts.
Welcome our second panel who will be talking about considerations and their wealth of experience in addressing those who are applying for pardon or representing those who are applying for pardon. So let me introduce our panelists. And I'm going to start with, let's see, oh, here we go. Let's make sure we're all here. Okay. First, at the far end of the table, Katherine Moran. Katherine is the Director of Victim Services at the Parole Board, also the Advisory Board on Pardons, obviously. And Katherine will be providing insights into the role that the voice of the victim plays in the pardon process. Then we have Patty Garin. And if you could just maybe just raise your hand. So there we go. Thank you. Along with Patty DeJuneas and Mia Teitelbaum, all three of whom are perhaps the preeminent attorneys in Massachusetts who are doing clemency work, and they're going to share with us, based upon their significant experience in advocating and shepherding applicants through the process, their perspectives on the challenges and considerations to consider when applying for a pardon. We have Madeline LaSanta Padilla, who has a long career as program manager here in Hampden County at the Hampden County Sheriff's Office at AISS, which I'm sure many of you know is the After Incarceration Support Services, which is focused on reentry services. And Madeline will share the challenges to successful reentry that she encounters with her clients regularly and the benefits that receiving a pardon could bestow. We have Assistant Attorney General Jared Cohen, who I had the pleasure of having before me for literally years, a standout in the Attorney General's office in Boston, in particular the Civil Rights and Reentry Division, and he will share his perspective on the benefits of a pardon. And we have Jeffrey Scott. And Jeff is the Field Services Division of the Parole Board. He is in the Field Services Division with 34 years of experience working in various capacities with the Parole Board. And Jeff will be offering his unique perspective on the reentry community. So let's get started here. Once again, we'll have questions at the end of the program. So first, let's talk about the experience of applying for a pardon, which certainly is heavily laden with emotional considerations. So let me turn to our three counsel, to Patty Garin, Patty DeJuneas, and Mia Teitelbaum. Starting perhaps with Patty Garin, what advice would you give a person applying for a pardon, including for those in their support system, their family, that sort of thing, to consider before and during the application process, with particular regard to the emotional experience of the process?
Yeah, Mia's going to start out.
Okay, so take it over, Mia.
Hi, everyone. So we just, in the interest of time, we're trying to divide things up. Now, just to be clear, I have actually focused, my practice has been exclusively really with commutation petitions. Okay, so, and I think both Patties have worked on pardons, but there's a lot of overlap in terms of the considerations and the emotional experience. So, I think one of the things that I really think is incredibly important for the family and the petitioner to be aware of is that this can actually be quite an emotional experience. In fact, I would call it somewhat re-traumatizing for everyone involved. And it's going to involve a hearing, likely before the Advisory Board of Pardons, where they're going to ask very tough questions. And so that's something that takes a lot of time to prepare everyone for, including the petitioner, but also the family to be prepared to be there present, see their loved one asked a lot of really difficult questions, and understand that this is not a situation where the board is kind of just calling them in to say, all right, we forgive you and we're going to wipe this from your record and it's going to be gone. And that people really have to learn to be able to talk about themselves in a complicated way that is sort of building up all the things that they've accomplished over the years, right? All the good citizenship stuff that they've been doing, even if they were incarcerated, as someone who's petitioning for commutation is doing, while also, factoring in the sense of commutation, like potentially remorse and how to express that. So that's just the major advice that I would provide.
Great. Other perspectives?
I would just add that you need to make sure your client understands this is an incredibly lengthy process, and they need to be able to be somewhat patient, although you have to keep nudging all the players along the way to get the job done. They will, but it takes a long time to prepare your pardon application, get it before the Advisory Board of Pardons, get them to rule on it. If they rule on a hearing, have an evidentiary hearing before the Advisory Board of Pardons, get the referral to the governor's office, then the governor's office spends time reviewing it, possibly gathering more information. They may ask more questions and want more documents. And then if they approve it, the governor's council has to approve it, and sometimes, as Tara noted, sometimes the governor's council wants to have another hearing, or all the counselors want to watch a video of the hearing that happened before the Advisory Board of Pardons, and then you wait for a fairly lengthy written decision on all of those steps along the way. So it's just a long process.
I'll just add one thing. For me and my clients, the most emotional aspect has been listening to the victims and victims' families. They're angry a lot of the time, and rightfully so. They have a lot of pain, and it's expressed, and you can feel it. Every hearing I've had where victims have come, I've cried. My clients have cried. It's really tough, and you're there as a supporter. It's hard to hear people say very negative things about your loved one, but you really do need to prepare yourself for that, because it's a very real possibility that the victim or victim's family, or someone from the district attorney's office might come and give the different perspective that's hard to hear.
That's a great segue to turn to Katherine and Jeff to talk about, from the victim's perspective, what the emotional experience, the experience otherwise, is in the process.
Sure, thank you. Very similar to the experience of the petitioner and the petitioner's family, the victims, survivors, and family, we're preparing them as well for the process. My role in the victim service unit is we're reaching out to victims and families when a petition for pardon and or commutation are filed. And we're really looking at each case individually. Certainly, we're looking at the nature and circumstance before we reach out to a family where it may have been decades since they heard from someone, to let them know that this person has filed a petition and the process is going to begin. And so we're really thoughtful in our outreach and speaking with them, letting them know how they can participate if they want to participate. and what that looks like. And we really navigate them through that process and prepare them as much as we can. As you know, the hearing itself, if it gets to a hearing stage, is extremely emotional. And so, we're providing a space for them before the hearing and after to debrief and certainly provides services in the community and make sure they're connected. So,
Jeff?
Thank you. As was stated on the first panel, time goes by, and families learn to cope and suppress feelings and deal with them on a day-to-day basis. Not only for the petitioner, but for the survivors and the survivors' families. As advocates, as attorneys, we've worked with Patty several times. On both sides, we have to be prepared for that trauma-informed response to not only assist the petitioner, but assist the families and their survivors. I can simulate this too. If you recall a sound or a smell that brings you back to your childhood, to a happy moment, just imagine the family or the survivors getting that letter for the first time 15 years later after they had been in court, and that response, that emotional response that occurs to the family. That also impacts the petitioner, the applicant too, because they have to relive that time in their life where the crime occurred and the conviction happened.
Right. Anything else, Catherine?
no, and I think too, we are able to provide information with regards to the petition itself, which I find is very helpful. So what the compelling need is, and what strides this petitioner has made in their lives have been really helpful in our conversations, and preparing families and victims has been really helpful when they're submitting and creating input if they choose. So.
All right. Anyone else on the panel relative to the experience from the victim's perspective? A couple questions for counsel. How do applicants find you? Does CPCS, for example, provide compensation for your services? How do they pay for you? Is there any level of referral or support for applicants?
There's not. Technically, under CPCS rules, this is not a part of the criminal process. And so there is no provision for appointment of counsel when you're seeking a pardon or a commutation. What sometimes happens is the commutation or the pardon line up with what you're arguing in a motion for a new trial or some other kind of post-conviction relief. And so you may end up getting some compensation for the work that you do. But as a straight out, could I get appointed counsel for a pardon or a commutation? Right now, the answer to that is no.
Okay.
So I've actually been appointed for a couple of commutation cases. It's really rare. We need to get approval from the head of CPCS. I've also co-chaired a clemency committee where we review applications, people looking for pro bono attorneys. We screen those applications to look for strong candidates, and then we try to find them lawyers, mostly big law firms that have pro bono divisions. And so as of right now, we've placed 3 commutations, 1 pardon, and I'm looking for counsel for 3 more commutation petitioners. But having counsel appointed is extraordinarily rare, and I would not advise anybody to rely on that happening. It's really, we're trying to form a pro bono network of attorneys to take these on.
Okay. All right. Great. This is a question we could start off with Jeff, but truly a question for all members of the panel. Based upon your experience, what do people miss or leave out in the application process?
It goes back to what Adam said in the first group, having a new, fresh set of eyes on what's happened over the course of time. What's often missed is the references and resources to pro-social change. What's happened since the conviction? What's happened since the incident? That you've put in all the hard work that somebody puts in, and we don't document it. The application is similar to, if you've looked at it online or through the references, it's similar to applying for a job or to a school. taking the opportunity to market yourself and sell yourself. What have I done to change? What pro-social changes happen? That's what the advisory board needs to see. And it's your opportunity, the person's opportunity to put that there in the application. So often we see it's unclear what they want for a pardon, which was discussed earlier today. But again, the applicant, it's your opportunity to market yourself and be there and give us the information that we don't already have about your past history.
Okay. Other thoughts? All right, well then inversely, what are some of the most important things that should be included on the application?
This sort of mixes with the last question. What is often left out, and what is some of the most important
Right.
things? You really, really have to, when you're asking for a pardon, document, argue over and over again, what is your compelling need for a pardon? No, a pardon is a complete, get the conviction off of your record. So you need to have a really strong and clear argument about why that conviction needs to be removed from your record. And there are lots of really strong arguments that people can write about. I mean, for example, one of the strongest ones is your client or you have committed a criminal offense, and that's going to lead to your deportation. You don't want to be removed. You don't want to be deported. You've been in this country for years. You've served your sentence. You've done your time. And now they're telling you you're going to be removed. So that is a compelling need. And I don't think you could think of any more compelling need than a person who comes in and says, I have a family here, I have children here, I have a life here, I have a job here, and now you're going to remove me because of this conviction that is decades old. But that happens, and that's an incredibly compelling need. Some people need to have ability to get a license, but because of this conviction, they can't get a license they need for a job. They can't get a barber license. They can't get a realtor license. They can't get any kind of license because of this conviction. That really impacts their ability to live a life. And some people can't get other kinds of jobs that you don't even need a license for, but there's that criminal conviction on your record, and so you're not going to get a job. You're not going to get housing. All of these things are really compelling needs, and the more you can document them and talk about them and show how they've affected your life, how you haven't gotten this job or that job, what you haven't been able to do, that's what you really need in a pardon application. Show that compelling need and then repeat it over and over again.
So let me turn to Patty and Mia and continue our discussion about compelling needs. In your practice, what are you considering in taking on a clemency case? And also, what do you consider when taking on and advocating for commutation? So if you can share some of your thoughts in terms of what those compelling needs are in those two regards.
So I've only represented one person for a pardon, and his compelling need was a little different, I think, than most of what they might see. It was he was very involved with his community, and then volunteer positions started requiring Corey checks. And he was embarrassed that he had a conviction from when he was 17 years old, and it was preventing him from doing volunteer work that would benefit a lot of people in his community. So that was the compelling need that we identified and emphasized for the Advisory Board of Pardons, and they agreed that it was a compelling need. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a job or deportation. It can be just something that's impacting your life in a negative way. Think outside the box. It doesn't need to be a job. It doesn't need to be an apartment. It could be just something preventing you from doing something good for the world.
Okay.
So again, I've not been involved in any pardon petitions, but with respect to commutation, which doesn't require this sort of compelling need, but something that are the things that I think are important to look at there are all these things are laid out in the guidelines, which are a world of difference from the prior administration. They're really, really helpful. But when I'm talking to someone about whether they, have a viable petition for commutation, one of the really important things is just how they talk about the crime, because people talk about what happened to them or what they did in varying degrees, and I need to be able to assess like how they're going to be able to respond to the questions that the board is going to ask them, and that's going to depend also on do they have pending appeals or motions for new trial that may have some interplay with how they're going to respond to these questions. So whether someone is a good candidate is going to depend a lot on how they can talk about this crime. Also, their institutional record. So as the first panel was talking about, even though it's not technically required, it is anticipated that people who are currently incarcerated will petition for commutation before pardon. So how have they done in prison? Do they have disciplinary reports? How recent are those disciplinary reports? What kind of disciplinary reports are they? Just for, I don't know, you are out of place, or is there violence involved? These kinds of things. And then what kind of programming people have done. This is a really important element to the Advisory Board of Pardons is, have people used their time proactively while they're incarcerated to address the underlying reasons for the crime, right? Was the crime committed, was an element that the person had a substance use disorder? What has the person done since that time to address that substance use disorder? Have they done restorative justice programming? This is something that's a big factor for the Advisory Board of Pardons. And then also another factor which isn't talked about on the guidelines, but I think is important anyway, is support outside of the prison. So because the idea is that you're going to be released. So even though that's really something that we talk about more in the parole context, I think even up front, the Advisory Board of Pardons does want to see what's going to happen when this person is released. Maybe not a super specific plan, but just generally, do they have people on the outside who are supporting them? Have they maintained contact with people? So these are all things that I consider when I'm looking at candidates and thinking about whether someone makes a good candidate, and I could actively, advocate for them in a good way.
The imposition of a felony or even a misdemeanor conviction has significant collateral consequences on all who have suffered those convictions, ranging from housing and employment to the denial of certain governmentally issued licenses and permits and so on and so forth. So what makes an interest compelling if everyone suffers those consequences? Is there a pile on, perhaps? Let me turn to some of our other panelists on that question as well. So, any thoughts? Jared?
Yeah. The concerns, as you mentioned, the concerns that are faced by individuals who might be interested in pursuing pardons are to a large extent the concerns faced by anybody who has prior criminal records and who is seeking to move past that history and have a successful reentry into the community and into society. And there's a number of barriers that anybody in that situation would face. As Judge Mason alluded to, there's barriers to seeking housing, barriers to seeking employment, licensing relationships. There are state law restricts to some degree how much housing providers and employers and licensors can use that information to hold it against and potentially discriminate against people with those histories, but it doesn't prevent them from using that information entirely. So that information can harm you. To the extent that, I'm going to turn it over to Madeline in a minute, because I know Madeline has a lot more knowledge and experience than I do with people as far as what those barriers are and what the needs of people in that situation is to surpassing those barriers. And I know her team does a lot of great work at AISS on that. So Madeline, do you want to jump in on that question?
Sure, thank you. And I recognize a few faces in the audience, but definitely even from it's a domino effect, right? You need a social security card, birth certificate in order to attain a driver's license. You need a driver's license or ID to find that employment. Maybe you were born in Puerto Rico and now you can't have that birth certificate and now you have to wait. But guess what? You also have to pay for that birth certificate application. You also have to pay for that ID. And so those become barriers, and we rely on definitely the community and some providers to provide that assistance. Um, as my panelists have mentioned, and I go back to, yes, it's the employment, it's the housing, but also with assisting those individuals with what we call at AISS a change of person file, right? What did they do while they were in custody, right? Maybe they're part of church, maybe they're part of whatever network that they have in order to demonstrate to an employer, for an example, to a housing authority that denied them because of their quarry, why, and the why, and to be able to navigate those systems and for them to be successful in those systems.
All right. You started to talk about, or you talked about, sealing of records, expungement of records. Let's talk a little bit about the interplay between the pardon process and the sealing of records, if there's anything further you wish to say. Jared?
Yeah, one thing that came up on the first panel, I think they mentioned that when someone obtains a pardon, the crime that they were pardoned for is automatically sealed. And we alluded briefly to the sealing process. I think one thing we should mention is that all of the barriers that we're discussing right now that someone may want to seek a pardon for, they can address a lot of those issues sometimes through the sealing process, which is for a lot of reasons a shorter and simpler process to get a particular charge sealed if you meet the criteria for that than it is to obtain a pardon. I think we heard some figures that in the last few years, the amount of pardon applications that were filed were in the dozens up to less than 100. I think the amount of charges that get sealed around the state each year are much higher than that. Judge Mason mentioned that he's been in the sealing session where he's seen many applications for sealing come before him, each week. So I think the process of sealing is one way that folks can address some of those barriers, but maybe not all of them. So there may be other things that you can that a pardon would get someone that sealing the charges alone wouldn't do.
Madeline, do you wish to add to that?
It's what we try to do is educate anyone that comes into our facility or our program on quarry. Definitely explaining how to go about sealing some of those records, assisting the individuals on sealing records. At AISS, we haven't assisted anyone individually with pardons. However, with quarries, definitely we assisted our folks with sealing and teaching them how to do that and helping them along the way.
Now, in a sealing session, such as I presided over for many years, there is notification given to the victim. Let's talk about that. Jared?
Yeah, we talked about this process in terms of the pardon application process. I think it's less of an administrative and bureaucratic process on the sealing front, but as you mentioned, it's still an issue. So a lot of the same issues that may come up on the pardon application process may come up in the sealing process, just on a sort of more truncated time frame and in a less bureaucratic manner. I mean, one thing I wanted to mention too is, we talked about, counsel here talked about the process for representing individuals in the pardon process. I should also note that in the sealing process, it's typically easier to find representation. There's organizations like Community Legal Aid, or in the eastern part of the state, Greater Boston Legal Services, that have quarry sealing clinics that are typically able to help individuals with individual applications for sealing in a way that's usually easier to obtain, I think, than the pardon process.
And in fact, this particular law school and the Center for Social Justice under Judge Fine's incredible work has a sealing clinic to provide pro bono services to individuals who are seeking sealing or expungement before. I think it's largely in the Springfield District Court. Yes.
Actually, I have
Hi, I'm Dina Fine, everybody. I was going to save this for the questions, but as long as we're on the point, yes, at the Center for Social Justice, we do criminal record sealing, expungement, administrative sealing, court sealing petitions. And so I'm going to leave a stack of these somewhere that you can grab one, just to get some information about how to contact us. We do clinics a couple of times a year out here in Western Massachusetts, and we have petitions pending all over the state at this point, Judge Mason. So we're available to help you with advice.
Excellent. And the sealing session, at least where I preside in the Springfield District Court, is robust. So let's move on. I want to talk for a brief moment about any pitfalls or mistakes, traps for the unwary that you might see play out in the pardon application process. So let me turn to Patty, and Mia, perhaps in that regard.
Sure, I'll start on that, if that's okay. So one thing that you really have to consider is acceptance of responsibility, and need to think long and hard. Are you actually innocent? Because if you're not actually innocent, don't argue it. Everybody presumes that you're guilty if you've been convicted, and they may have questions for you about the crime, but it's a huge mistake to go in there and to diminish the crime or argue, it wasn't me. If all the evidence points to you, you're going to lose all your credibility right there. So, of course, if you are actually innocent, that is important to note and to state and to maintain, but otherwise, really, I would not go into that. And also with letters of support, you should be getting them from everybody that you've helped, everyone that knows you. Have them tell a story about you. Do not have them say, he's innocent, she's innocent, because people just stop paying attention. So acceptance of responsibility is the number one most important thing for me in screening petitioners for both pardons and commutation.
Okay, from our other counsel.
Go ahead. One thing that I often include in clemency petitions is the effect that my client's race has had on how they are treated throughout the criminal legal system. Most of us have had plenty of clients who ended up being convicted of a felony when if they were not a person of color, they would have been convicted of a misdemeanor. There's lots of data and studies now that help you establish this and make this argument. Lots of people didn't make parole years ago, maybe somewhat is still going on now, but to a lesser degree because of their color. There's statistics to help show this, but I think it's important to point it out in your petitions because clemency is supposed to be about correcting unfairness. And most people have been exposed to unfairness in the criminal legal system at some point. And to the extent that you can document it, although it might not be your leading card in your petition, it plays a really important part in showing what happened to your client and why. What had happened to you if you're writing for yourself and why. The people who ended up being tried on first-degree murder when if they hadn't been a person of color, they might have been indicted on manslaughter. There's so many cases like that in our system. And clemency is a way to get that out there and to address it and to ask for some relief from it. And frankly, the governor's office is responsive to that, as is the Advisory Board of Pardons. Certain members are particularly attuned to that, and certain members of the Parole Board are particularly attuned to that. And it's really important to make sure that you can document what happened in your life, the stages along the way where this happened, and put in all the other stuff about that you need for this petition. But a lot of times people leave out that, and that's such a big part of what happened to them. The other thing is, remember, these are guidelines. The guidelines, the governor's guidelines are guidelines, and they don't have to be met exactly. I mean, if you want to get a pardon and the guidelines say you should have 5 or 10 years of, productive good behavior in the community in order to do it, but you want to get a pardon so you don't get deported next year, you're not going to prove 5 or 10 years of good behavior in the community. And the parole board gets that, as does the governor's council, as does the governor. So don't let some of those guidelines that seem impenetrable stop you from applying, because you can get over them.
Patty?
Me.
Yeah.
That's all right. Really not to add very much, because I think both Patties have touched on the major things. But I do think one of the things that's really important for any of these petitions is to tell a story. So I think it ties in all of this. This is often the first opportunity people have had to kind of tell their story. And so you're trying to pull in all different aspects of really sort of like tell a whole story from potentially birth up until this point in time, like who this person is now. And I think like one of the biggest mistakes is people just don't think that's necessary. They just fill out sort of the bare bones, or they focus more on, in this sense of commutation, just like how much time they've been in, or I don't know, the fact perhaps they're claiming innocence, but you really want to show. I think the board, and I think I believe the governor's office really cares to see how people have changed over the years, how they've grown. I think that's reflected in our law right now, because we're all starting to talk about how, and this was touched a bit on in the first panel, about adolescent brain development. So many of the clients that we're working with committed these crimes when they were very young. And so being able to explain how this person was at the time, and who they were at the time versus who they are now, is so important for any of these petitions.
As a prelude to one of our last questions, I'll simply commend to you the particular provision of the clemency guidelines, which state that the governor is mindful that racial disparities exist at every stage of the criminal legal system, and that racial disparities and biases have resulted in the mass incarceration of Black and Latino defendants at a rate far higher than their white counterparts. The governor will take the persistence of racial disparities and their root causes into account in determining whether issuing clemency would address a miscarriage of justice. And this is an underlying theme in these guidelines, and perhaps one of the driving forces. So let me turn, with particular regard to that comment, to Jared and Madeline, and ask, when you think about specific barriers facing those involved in the criminal justice system, and this goes to some of the questions that Gary raised earlier and the other gentleman, what can we do to advocate on the state and local level to help remove those barriers and pave a smoother, more successful path to re-entry post-incarceration?
Yeah, this is a question that's really important to Attorney General Campbell. It's something that our office is looking really closely at. The legislature has taken some measures in the last few years to address these questions. We passed the Ban the Box law in 2010, which was important but very limited. We passed some other measures in the Criminal Justice Reform Act in 2018 that addressed some things, again, but there's a lot left to do to address some of these barriers. One of the things that we've done this year, Attorney General Campbell has assembled a couple of working groups to address barriers specifically to housing and to employment and entrepreneurship, barriers for individuals with criminal records. So we've been working with these working groups and talking to members of the community, practitioners, representatives of the Department of Correction, sheriff's offices, parole, and we've been trying to come up with creative solutions as to what we can do on a public policy level, on a practitioner level. So there's a number of things that we're working on, and we're always looking for more community impact there. But there's other legislative initiatives that are being talked about. There will probably be new bills introduced into the legislature in the next couple of years. People are talking. There's a Clean Slate Act that people are talking about when it comes to the automatic sealing of people's records, so people don't have to take all sorts of initiative in order to seal their own records. So I think there's a lot to do and things that we are working on, taking a close look at in the Attorney General's office.
Excellent. Madeline.
And then our role is basically to educate our members that are affected and to take advantage of these initiatives, and just to continue to teach and rely on our community providers as well, and just work collaboratively, and just to continue to push on and spread the word and connect with as many individuals as we can to assist with these measures.
Excellent. Other thoughts in that regard before we open up the discussion to our audience members? Okay. So I know there's some questions out there. Attorney Thompson, sock it to me.
One of my questions goes to how the period you measure for good citizenship. And the kind of, if you've never had a criminal prosecution before and you're convicted of something, and you have this exemplary life that you've lived except for this conviction.
Right.
Does that exemplary period count in your favor?
Definitely, definitely. I mean, your whole life is looked at when you're asking for clemency. What your life was like prior to the crime, why did the crime occur, the effect, your understanding of why the crime occurred. And I would say that that period of good citizenship, be it before the crime or after the crime or both, counts for a lot. And remember, the after the crime period is not a requirement. It doesn't have to be 5 years or 10 years. It's just it's just their statement of what they're looking at. But I've had plenty of cases where both the parole board and the governor's office don't abide by that 5 and 10 year rule.
The related question that I have has to do with people who are held pre-trial and people who are released pre-trial for the same offense. And the people who are released pre-trial have an opportunity to show their good rehabilitation, and people who are not released pre-trial lack that opportunity. So I think bail determinations and things like that play a huge part in this good citizenship determination, and also race plays a big part in whether or not you're going to be released pre-trial. And so I just wonder how that might get taken into consideration.
Such a great question that opens us up to a consideration of pretrial detention and the inequities associated with it. Thoughts round table as to how that would play into a subsequent application for commutation or pardon.
Want to do it?
I can see.
Well, I mean, I think in the context of commutation, people are rarely, because mainly what we're dealing with are people who have been sentenced to life in prison, asking for commutation to be released. So they, you have to use the tools you have. So most of these people were not released pre-trial. I do know some were, but just being able to show, again, it's how you've used the time that you have. So, unfortunately, when people are in county jails, like often there is no programming, but sometimes maybe there's some drug programming, and if the person at least applied for that, can show, as so much of this is just documenting every effort that you've made, even if it was unsuccessful. So same thing when people are released pre-trial, it's like, okay, did you try to get into this program? And this, I think, comes into the pardon process of, why do you need that pardon? You've applied for all these things and you haven't been able to get it, perhaps because of that conviction. So I think it probably plays, I'm sure it plays a role. All of this is tied together. And what you want to be able to do is show how it plays a role. So Patty Garin was talking earlier about how important race is, and you can explain, well, you can cite those it's easier if you have counsel, but you can cite those statistics about, like, yes, I wasn't released pre-trial, and I wasn't able to do these things. This is what I tried to do. Race in the past has played a factor in who is released pre-trial or not. These are the things we try to work in. It's hard if you don't have counsel, but I mean, these are the things that we try to teach people to think about when they're trying to tell their story.
Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm Tony Taylor from Springfield Partners for Community Action. I see this paradigm shift, and I see this is a great effort. but so wasn't the effort in the marijuana program. So when you talk to me and you say how the governor is looking at this, and she understands Black and people of color, and we look at what a mess that happened because people didn't receive the justice. So when you say that to me, it means a lot, but what really have we done? So we also have to understand that people that have been incarcerated, we got to think about informed trauma. Now you want and you expect so many things out of them when they have informed trauma. Okay, we understand if they're 17 and their brain was not at that level and they get older and so forth, they understand the consequences and so forth. But people that's been locked up, incarcerated, informed trauma. So we want to be concerned about that. Also, you might want to think about agencies, which I know there's some agencies here that you should be reaching out to. And I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just passionate about it. That you should reach out to. How do we get this word out to them? Because it seems to me that it's very difficult and it's such a large burden on anybody to get involved with to help oneself. And if you're not educated, and if your family's not with you, the mark is also high. So I really don't understand this to a certain degree. I understand the effort, but we have agencies out here such as Springfield Partners and other people that are here. You should reach out for them. We do community efforts all the time. That's all we do.
As a
Yes.
practitioner, and this comes up mostly in parole, but the parole work is very virtually identical to commutation work. I try to educate my clients about the traumas that I think they may have been exposed to. So prison trauma is one thing that I'm learning about. I've also been learning about poverty trauma, and kind of things that people don't really think about because those traumas impact somebody's rehabilitation. So I want to educate them so that they could think about how this trauma is playing out in terms of their incarceration, and also to educate the parole board to explain some behavior that might be judged more harshly than it should be given the trauma. So I think lawyers, we have a role there, and I think that, we have an obligation to be educating our clients on those things.
Just one comment. I only want to say that because I spent over 30 years in the psych field. It was learned by Charlie Swanson, Dr. Hampden, Bay State, head of Bay State. There's so many others. Boston Analytical School of Science. Informed trauma is the number one. Because if you don't understand where I came from, you won't understand what I need.
Exactly.
Or where can I go?
Or how far you've come.
Right. Madeline, do you want to give a local perspective?
Yes, I can speak just for Hampden County Sheriff's Office, and that's one of the things that we do focus on with our inmate population while they're in custody. So it's not just the old school of just lock them up and wait till they get, your release. It's providing those not only vocational trainings, but mental health, substance use, education, medication. We're providing MAT inside. So there are various programming that does happen pre-trial and sentence for the pre-trial and sentence population to address some of those issues as well. Can we answer all of them? No. But can we provide just that lending hand or those services in order to, when they come out into the community, to reintegrate a little easier? Absolutely. And then have that warm handoff from being inside to where I'm at AISS. And I do appreciate Springfield Partners.
All right, we have a question over here.
This is directed to the Attorney General's office and anyone else who wants to comment. I'm wondering about the composition of the working groups and whether or not the diversification is inclusive of geography, and whether or not there are folks on those working committees who are developing strategies to approach how we can better assist folks. Have any lived experience or living experience within those bodies? Because again, what was spoken about with regard to people having had experience is important.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're very attuned to that question, and we've tried as hard as we can, just as we've launched these working groups off the ground, to try to incorporate the voices of people who are working in the community in all parts of the state. We don't want to be too heavily weighted on Boston and Eastern Mass. We try to get voices from Western Mass, Central Mass, all around. So we've tried really hard to incorporate diverse voices in that sense. And I think people who are working on the ground in communities are overrepresented. There's a government agency representation in those groups because we want to have the government perspective, but that's really a minority perspective in there. If folks know people either here in Springfield or elsewhere who want to be involved in these working groups, who are on the ground working on issues that related to housing barriers, employment, entrepreneurship barriers, licensing, anything like that, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. We're happy to incorporate more voices and more groups and individuals into the working groups.
Okay, over here.
Yeah, so hi, thank you. So is the governor working on, so this is a great offer, right? Great opportunity for those that need it, right? But is the governor working on implementing an office that will provide counsel for this specifically for all these people that are interested? Because I feel like it's just like a carrot being waved. I'm never gonna grab it.
So perhaps I'll turn to one of the representatives from the Governor's Office of Legal Counsel to address that. So can you just repeat your question? And I'm going to have a representative from the Governor's Office of Legal Counsel.
The question was, let me rephrase, right? The question was, is this opportunity is great, and I'm glad you guys are sharing this information with us, but is the governor's office, or maybe I'm lost somewhere, are they planning on implementing an office that will actually provide counsel for all these people that are interested in this carrot that seems unreachable?
All right, yeah, Paige.
So just what we have been able to do. There's a little bit of tension because when you submit an application, it comes to us. So we can't write the application and review the application. So there's a little bit of a tension there. So what we have been doing is working with bar associations in particular. There are various ones throughout. Boston Bar Association, Mass Bar Association, and also community groups to try and do some of what the panel has been doing, which is put individuals who are interested in applying for this relief together with counsel who might be able to provide pro bono assistance, in other words, provide assistance without charge. And the governor's office has been trying to play a role of matchmaking and trying to make sure that attorneys who are looking for volunteer opportunities where they could give back to their communities know that this is a thing where their services are needed, and also that bar associations are playing some of the role of coordination, or community groups are playing some of the role of coordination to put one together with the other. But, that's, I think, where we have been. And also, counsel is absolutely helpful in doing this, but if an application comes in and really it seems on the face of it that there's a good reason for the request, but they are self-represented and there are places where there's lack of clarity, both the parole board and our office particularly will reach out to them and will be helpful. We are trying to help, because the last thing we want is what you have suggested, which is there is an opportunity, but the lack of counsel is the only thing that is preventing individuals from taking advantage of it. We're very conscious of that, and the folks in my office who do this work won't just stop at this application is from somebody who doesn't have counsel. Let's just not pay attention to it. They'll take that extra step.
All right, Gary.
Yeah, I just want to state the obvious, piggybacking on my friend over here. I've been doing this work for a long time, and I think it's very clear that I think it's they're rushing. Okay, I'll start again. All right. So I just want to take the time to state the obvious for my friend over there. I've been doing this work for a long time, and I say this respectfully. If the governor is invested, there should be money invested. So these situations that we're hearing about over here would not exist. So it's very easy to come and say that we're trying and we're doing this and we really care. The proof is, where is the money allocated that shows that there's a care and concern? And I just wanted to state that, because I think my colleagues that are going to go away, they ought to think about this, and they need to say to the governor, we love what we're hearing, but here's the reality. How is this playing out? So I just wanted to offer that as a comment.
Great, thank you. And, this program is as much a forum for discussion as it is a educational presentation. So, Dina.
Yeah, just to repeat that we here at the Center for Social Justice do criminal record sealing. We aren't yet doing pardons and other clemency work writ large, but we do Corey work. We help folks expunge their marijuana convictions, for instance, or do administrative sealing with the Department of Probation, or discretionary sealing with courts. So that's available right here in Springfield. Is CLA in the room? Is Community Legal Aid in the room? Because CLA locally, Community Legal Aid, also has a criminal records and reentry unit. I don't know, obviously I can't speak for CLA. I don't know what kind of work they do. Perhaps okay, Maddie knows. But there are some local resources in addition to the materials that I know are available online to help folks try to do this themselves, understanding, I was a judge. I know the difference between having a self-represented litigant and a represented litigant appear in front of me. There's a big difference, but there are some local resources to begin to bridge that gap.
All right.
Definitely.
Patty.
We have CLA in our office every Wednesday from 9 to 11.
All right. Patty, you wanted to comment?
I just wanted to add that this certainly doesn't help with the lack of appointed counsel in individual cases, but the Women's Bar Organization, Women's Bar Association are definitely helping us get counsel in place. They're referring cases out to counsel, and the law school programs are doing it somewhat as well. Those are not appointed counsel, that's just free legal help, but it's some more areas for resource.
Let me just, yes, you have one question, then we're going to close out. Yeah. No, I'm going to close out, so you wouldn't have anything to say. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm Don Wright, CEO of Intervision Poverty Consulting Center, reentry organization in Springfield. Oh, thank you. My question is I believe it was the person all the way to the right there. I'm sorry, your name escapes me. Patty. You were saying that it's a lengthy process, this whole thing, and I've done my research, and it is. My question is it lengthy for everyone? For example, in my particular case, when I was arrested, convicted, incarcerated at my time, I was a light for the probation office. I was an exemplary inmate, ran programs. When I got out, I was a light for the parole office. I started a nonprofit organization. Now I help individuals coming out returning citizens. I helped to get $1.8 million for the Office of Returning Citizens in Boston. So I have a body of work 15 years long. There are no victims. So in a particular case like mine, would I have to go through the same lengthy process if there's no victims, if there are no impediments, if I have a proven record of transitioning from criminality to now a civic citizen, would my process be the same as someone who doesn't have all of those elements? And additionally, I think that organizations like ours on the front line would be better served at assisting organizations like yours in finding individuals who are similar more to my nature than others who may not have a chance at all. Yeah, they can apply, but they probably won't be approved. So is there a process of weeding out those who have a better chance so you can fast track them as opposed to those who may have more of a lengthy period trying to get this all straightened out?
The questions are related. Does someone want to respond?
I'll start to address it. It's a three-step process, which is why it's so long. First, you go to the Advisory Board of Pardons, then you go to the governor, and then you go to the Governor's Council. And the Governor's Council aspect is in our Constitution, so we can't cut that out. So Now things are moving a lot more quickly. I'm finding that I'm getting, if I file a petition for commutation, I find out within 10 weeks whether I'm getting a hearing. When I get a hearing, the hearing happens within 2 months. And then within 4 months after that, I've gotten my decisions. So right now I've got 2 positive recommendations for commutation on Governor Healy's desk. They haven't been there for very long. But it is a lengthy process, but it is a lot less lengthy now than it has been in past administrations.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to close out with just a brief discussion of a concept which was fleetingly mentioned, restorative justice. Okay. So many of you perhaps have not heard of restorative justice. Restorative justice is a process whereby victims work with defendants and their counsel, assisted by victim witness advocates, in order to shape a disposition of a criminal case which meets the ends of justice. Restorative justice is a concept which has been championed by our Supreme Judicial Court, and we are quite fortunate to have a Chief Kim Budd, who has championed restorative justice across the Commonwealth. Here in Western Massachusetts, we actually have one of the very first restorative justice programs that was started out of the Northwest District Attorney's Office in Hampshire and Franklin counties. There's a smattering of restorative justice programs throughout the Commonwealth. And so it seems, and I'd like to get comment, I think it maybe it was Mia who mentioned it, from Mia, and then we'll close out, as to how restorative justice interplays with this concept of pardon for, if there is a successful restorative justice, then perhaps there need not be a petition for commutation or pardon down the road. And if one were to be futurist in our thinking, where does this process of restorative justice take us along the pathway to pardon?
So when I mentioned this, I was talking about it in the context of programs that are offered in the prisons. It depends on the prison, what programs are offered, how many restorative justice programs are offered. And I will mention that a number, in fact, the foremost restorative justice program, I think that started out of MCI Norfolk by prisoners. And I think, in fact, actually a client of Patty's was very involved in getting that going. And they've grown. Mm-hmm. But I think that in the context of the clemency petitions, why it's so important is because, as Patty DeJuneas had mentioned, remorse is a huge component that the Advisory Board of Pardons is looking at, the Governor's Council, unless there's an actual innocence claim, in terms of how the petitioner talks about the crime. So that if someone has never gone through any kind of restorative justice programming, that can be very difficult. I mean, there's particular ways to there's particular language people use, and it's just hard if you haven't been faced with folks who have been victims of crimes, it's just hard to actually even envision what they may have experienced. On the other hand, a lot of our clients actually have been victims themselves of various crimes. So the sort of interplay, I think, is that in the context of commutation, remorse is so important. I think people are starting to come around to the idea that this is a really productive way to talk to sort of show how we've grown as individuals, how our clients, how petitioners have grown as individuals, how all of us have grown as individuals. In the context of a pardon, I don't know that this has been really addressed at any point yet, but I could see a world in which it could be incredibly helpful for the board to see that someone had engaged in restorative justice either pre-trial. Ideally, they would never have gotten to the point of a conviction if they went through perhaps a restorative justice program before trial. But if not, then after trial, engaging with the community, engaging with people who had experienced were victims of various crimes, and showing that they had, been exposed to that perspective. I could see that being an important consideration, but I'm not on the board nor a member of the governor's office.
Well, so much food for thought. Thank you very much. And we're going to close. Well, Linda, I'll give you the last word, but it's got to be short.
Be short, because one thing we haven't addressed is trial court judges' participation in this system. And so going back to both pretrial release and post-conviction, but pre-appeal release. Those are opportunities where people have lawyers to help them get going in the place they need to go. So trial judges need to be addressed on this, on the need to give this person a chance to make their record either pre-trial or post-conviction and pre-appeal.
Absolutely. And from one who sat for 15 years, I can count on maybe 3 fingers the motions to revise or revoke that I've seen. Highly underutilized. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists on panel 2, panel 1, all of our community participants, but most of all, I want to thank that shining light, that beacon of justice from someone who is not even an attorney, who has blessed us as our District 8 Governor's Council member, an individual whom most of us probably didn't even know a couple of years ago, and who took us by storm. And we are so grateful and thankful to Counselor Tara Jacobs. So I'm going to give you the last word here, Tara. This was your inspiration, your program. Great. Tara, I'll give you the last word.
I don't know if I want to catch that thing.
I give it to her. All right, there we go. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say how amazing today has been. I want to say again, thank you so much to the panelists who've driven from so far and joined us today, everyone who's helped us organize this today. I'm going to end where I started. This information is so important, but really what is truly important is what happens with it next. You are all here receiving what is very rarely talked about or understood out in the greater world, and you have an opportunity to be a part of making sure it reaches the ears who need to hear it. And I think there's 2 parts. There's the information. I hope you went to the link here, and the application for the pardon is the first link on that page. Download the application. But in addition to the information itself and disseminating that, supporting the people who need a pardon, right? Helping them you've heard about the emotional context of it all. It's so important to understand. It's a traumatic thing to go back through. So helping people literally fill out the pardon application, but be a helping hand and a supportive framework during the whole lengthy experience. So I hope that we're going to see a mountain of applications come through. You heard how few they receive year over year. I hope that number is radically different next year. And I hope council gets to see a whole lot of governor initiated requests for us to give clemency at council. So thank you all so much.
Please share this recording far and near for those who could not attend today. With that, thank you all very much.